Peace be upon you, creative minds. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel and to another video. My name is Nasira. I am an interior designer and a custom organization solution designer. In today's video, we're going to discuss something that is in continuation with something we have already talked about in one of my previous videos, and that was the 7 elements of interior design. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the 7 principles of interior design, or let's call it the rules of interior design, right? These 7 principles of interior design are balance, emphasis, contrast, rhythm, scale and proportion, harmony and unity, and details. So these are the 7 principles of interior design, and we're going to discuss each principle in depth in this video. So the first principle of interior design is balance. Every designer, no matter what field they are in, tend to want to understand the importance of balance. It is all about the visual weight of your space and how to divide it between 2 sides. Now, when we mention balance and looking it up in the dictionary, it will tell us that it is all about evenly distributed weights that enable something or someone to remain steady and upright. It is pretty much the same exact thing for interior design. You're trying to evenly distribute elements to create balance visually. It can be created through the introduction of different forms, colors, or textures, or creating little space symmetry. There are 3 kinds of balance: radial, symmetrical, and asymmetrical. Radial balance has to do with, the stairs, for instance, round dining tables or chandelier around which we try to create a balanced space. The first impression should be that every other element seems to radiate in circular symmetry around focal point. Now, asymmetrical balance is kind of related to a modern design. A lot of people wanted to do this, but I think also it is the most difficult thing to do. When you're trying to do something in odd numbers in order to keep a focal point in an imaginary central axis. So the last one, which is symmetrical balance, has to do, and I think you guessed it, is the most traditional design principle, if you will, and it has to do with like common spaces or elements that are in square type rooms. If your room is narrow, think about choosing asymmetrical type. To achieve the symmetrical balance, we need to divide the space into 2 equal halves, going on an imaginary axis through the center. Each half is compensated equally as the other half. This gives a living space a calm feeling. And the last one, after repeating items or mirrors along that axis, that will achieve and centrally achieve the symmetry. The second principle of interior design is emphasis. What does that mean? What are you trying to do with emphasis? So, first off, let's say that emphasis and contrast are actually 2 principles that are very, very important, and I feel like they work hand in hand. But what comes first is the key, right? So some designers, what they do is they create first the focal point in the room, and then they start balancing it out throughout the decor, symmetry, asymmetry, or radial balance, right? So first of all, what you have to do is you decide what is your focal point. What is one space or thing that you want to emphasize? It could be art, it could be a piece of furniture, etc. So once you decide what that piece of furniture or art or piece of emphasis is, then you can place it, and then you start balancing things off of it. All right. So when talking about emphasis, we are going to be discussing 2 things. So you could be placing, let's say, pieces of furniture, as I said, and you want to know where you want to put them exactly.
a place that makes sense to you and to a person who's visiting the space, right? So imagine you have a long hallway and you want to use that back wall to have a piece of art with some lighting on it. That is your focal point, right? Or a piece of furniture that you put in the center of the living room, for instance, and then you can have side tables on it to create symmetry, but your focal point is your beautiful sofa you want to display. The third principle of interior design is contrast. I think the, let's say the secret ingredient in creating like a place that is, or a space that is very interesting is contrast. So what does contrast mean? What are we doing? All right. So we're talking about the differences in maybe colors, in lumens in the space, the texture. So you have two different things in the same space, not necessarily competing with each other, but are creating some kind of contrast and interest in the space. So what can you do to create contrast in a room? You can use so many different elements like space, color, texture, pattern, if you will. So let's start, let's say, with form. Form, we're talking about, let's say you have a line, a vertical line, a horizontal line, or something like this. So you can create a space where it has both of these lines together. So you're contrasting, you're not having just one horizontal line in everything you're doing, but you're also having vertical lines. One of the one of the elements of interior design that could work so well in contrast, and I think a lot of people think of it when they think of contrast, is black and white, which is color. So black and white is such a classic that you will never get tired of, and it's always a point of interest when you see it in a room. Another thing you can do to create contrast is texture. So when you talk about texture, remember it's all about the feel. Sometimes it's also what you see. You could see maybe a wallpaper that has trees on them. You can't really feel them, but you can sense it, like the three-dimensional feel of it. The same thing with textile or texture. So imagine you're going or like rubbing your hand across the backsplash and you can feel the little harshness of it, right? And then you go over your dining table and you feel how smooth the wood is or the glass is. So those are different feels that you can have. Also, think of the pieces that you have in your place. For instance, if you have a rectangular sofa, you can contrast that by having a round coffee table. There you go. You have an interest. It's not always just the same. There is contrast. The fourth principle in interior design or of interior design is rhythm. It's the same thing like music. Whatever you hear, how does it sound? How does it flow? The same thing with interior design. How does your space flow together? Right? So rhythm it's kind of like tying all the other principles and putting them together to create a space that is pleasing, aesthetically pleasing, and functional. Now, when we talk about rhythm, we have in mind like 5 different things, right? So contrast, for instance, let's talk about shapes in here. Imagine you have a rectangular sofa and a round table put next to each other. There you go, there is rhythm already, right? But you are also including 2 other elements and another principle in your space. Another thing is what we call transition. So how do you move from one thing to the other, right? Imagine you have walkways and how they open to each other and stuff like that. How do you transition to get from one point to another? The third thing is gradation. So what does that mean? It means that you're going through like a step by step. Right? So imagine, and maybe a simplest example will be to look at the stairs, for instance, right? So you have, think of it step by step. So your stairs are taking you one by one, and that's the gradation to get somewhere. Another thing is radiation. What that means is that you're trying to talk about different elements of interior design and you're putting them together to have some kind of movements that is kind of organic, right? Imagine you're like the flow, maybe you have a coffee table that is round and how do you flow around it? That radiation, that circular motion and stuff like that. Another thing, and I think is what a lot of people think when they talk about rhythm, is repetition. So what do you repeat? Some elements you can repeat several times, and that creates the repetition, and your eye is just having some kind of rhythm. You know what's coming next, right? And you can do that, let's say, by pattern. You have black and white. There you go. There is color. So you can know that by A, B, A, B, A, B, and stuff like that, or A, B, B, and stuff, and you're just focusing on moving with that. And one thing to note about rhythm when you're trying to have different things together is to minimize them to maybe 2 different techniques, which we have talked about, like contrast, gradation, repetition, and stuff like that. So choose 2 of these in your space and work with them instead of having the 5 of them together. That's going to be too much. So there's your tip. The 5th principle of interior design is scale and proportion. When we discuss this principle, we are thinking about sizes. So for scale, it could be the size of an object in, let's say, generally with another one, but not necessarily compared to another one, okay? But proportion is you're talking about 2 objects and you're trying to see the relationship between these 2 objects. For instance, let's take an example of a coffee table and a sofa. So some people or some designers think that the coffee table should be the 2/3 of the size of the sofa. Right? So right now you're already talking about the size, the scale, and the proportion. Is maybe the coffee table going to be too small? Is it going to be too big for a space? So also when you're trying to get the scale and the proportion of a room correct, think of it also as the golden ratio. Interior designers love the ratio of 1.618, and that is just something that they have seen that is repeated in nature. It's just created for us already, and you can see how perfect nature is. So you can tell that that ratio always works. So think of it as, instead of having a room and cutting it into 2 or dividing it into 2, think of it as 2, but then the other third to do it, or the other half to create 2 spaces out of that. And that's where you can create a few things. So the room is not the whole thing, but lots of elements and lots of furniture and scales playing together. The 6th principle of interior design is harmony and unity, hand in hand. So what does that mean? Harmony is actually a very interesting and very important principle we have to think of when we are creating a space. And for some reason, it just makes the whole space, whatever you put, whatever objects and elements you create, they will eventually create a harmonious space. How can you do that? What makes a space look harmonious and united or uniformed? All right. Well, so let's take a look first at unity. And I think that has to do with, you're combining a few elements together, something similar in shape. You have circular shapes, for instance, and or round shapes. You put them together, and that creates, or even your coffee table is round, and I feel like it's a theme that I talk about round coffee tables. But so you already see that this is repeated, that creates unity, that you have something that is going with you, right? There is a unity in form. For harmony, it's sort of like things feel they belong together. They do with sameness. So you have, let's say, the same color, the same texture, the same lighting feel, right? So you're having it go around the house. Let's say you repeat a shape in your bedroom and you find it in your living room. That is harmony in your whole house, right? But if you have something different, then you might have it's not necessarily not harmonious, but it's a different feel. Sometimes you go into spaces and you're like, oh my God, it just feels like it's all put together nicely. And that is the key in harmonious spaces. The 7th principle of interior design is details. You hear that a lot probably when you listen or watch some interior design videos. We always talk about details. People think that they are small, but they make up a big impact. So think of details as a few pieces or few details and little things that you can add or pick up from to put it somewhere else and make the space look like you are thinking well and enough about. Imagine fleur-de-lis, or let's say a paisley that you can see in your rug, for instance. That same pattern or same detail repeated in your texture, in your pillows, for instance, right? So that is one thing, like a little detail you pick from one place, you put it into another, and you create something that is well thought of. It could also be color, right? So you know that you have been doing a lot of blue, for instance, in your house, and then you just pick that. You could do that in accents like polka dots, vases in your space, so that picks up from your blue sofa in your living room into your little polka dot spots in your vase in your bedroom. There you go. So you have details. You're thinking about every single little detail that could make the space look like you thought of everything, and you are putting it all together to feel harmonious, uniform, and beautiful. And these were the 7 principles of interior design. So today we have discussed balance, emphasis, contrast, rhythm, scale and proportion, harmony and unity, and details. I hope you enjoyed this video and you took so much from it. Let me know if you need extra information or if you want me to talk about one principle in more details, and I'll be more than happy to do that. Thank you so much again for watching. I'll leave you in style now, so peace.